Hey guys, it's good to see you. It's Ryan here with DP Marketing.Services, author on the book on digital marketing for plumbing and HVAC contractors, and also the host of the podcast, The Blue Collar CEO. It's good to see you. Thank you for stopping by because I know you're busy. Hey, coming at you video, I know I talk to a lot of plumbing, HVAC, just home service company guys, and a lot of times there's like question or confusion about how different agencies price themselves and deliver their services. And it's not really like you guys are interested in it, like, this intrigues me. It's more just like, I don't understand why this price is different than this price. What's going on here? And so I thought, you know what, that's totally a fair question. So I thought I'd spend this video kind of just talking about that. So this is very insider baseball. This is more about our industry to help inform you on like how different companies are kind of set up. There might be some like nuances between them and some hybrid sort of approaches, but generally speaking, I thought it'd just be helpful to kind of pull back the curtain and show you how some of the different models exist in the digital services space. Okay. So for the first time ever, I'm really excited to do this too. We're going to have really fancy graphics and animations to help communicate this. So here we go. Ready? So on my left here, you'll see all of these pricing models in front of us. And if I go from top to bottom, you'll see there's quite a lot. I'm just kidding. Guys, I can't afford to have somebody do these cool graphic things. So I have these really low-tech Post-it notes that I did. So, gotcha. Okay, so model number one. I'm gonna call this input pricing. This is gonna be similar, if you're familiar with time and materials, this is gonna be really similar to that sort of approach. Nothing inherently wrong with it. It's one of these where you're kind of buying time. Like at the end of the day, that's kind of what you're paying for, and it's a time of a web developer or a content writer or someone to design a graphic. So if somebody talks to you, if you're trying to find somebody to build a website in your town, and they're asking questions like, "Well, are you going to write the content? Or are we going to write the content? Are you going to take the photos? Or are we going to have to do the photos?" They're doing this kind of T&M calc in their head of how much time is going to be required if they've got to get a contractor in to actually go take photos, for instance. And it's time calculus. Also, if you are bringing people in-house, that's what you're buying for also. So if you're at the stage where your business is considering bringing inside someone on your marketing team who works for the business full-time, you're buying that time. That's the capacity resource that you're leveraging. There's sometimes questions on like, do you own this content or rent this content at this point? And if you follow anything, you know it's really important to own your data. So typically two options are own your data or rent your data. When you are doing an input pricing model, it's pretty much you pay for exactly what you get. So just like you're doing T&M, it's like you paid for that part and I'm doing this time and I've got all these extra supplies, materials there. So that's all good. When the job's done, you pay up, everything's done. It's pretty clean. But obviously it gets very a la carte very quick. So this is where you're going to run into like websites costing like $90,000 to $100,000 sometimes. It's because they're doing the input. You're like, well, I need a whole lot of content pages. But cool, we can totally do that. That's going to be a whole lot of time on their part to allocate. So your 150,000 page website is going to cost $150,000. So that's kind of how that works. The next option is going to be called output pricing. So this is one that might be a little bit more comfortable for guys that are doing a flat rate model for their own business. Because if input is going to be T&M, output is going to be things that are going to be focused like on you're paying for the job, not necessarily for the time required to do the job, right? So an example on here, if you hire a content writer to write a blog for your website, and let's say it's a 1,500 word blog, you might pay, I don't know, 50 cents a word. Okay, cool. So you're paying for the output of that 50 cents per word. You're not really caring about the time, right? If it takes them a day to write it or a week to write it, it doesn't matter. You're paying for a 1,500 word blog. So you're paying for the output of the time, for the research, the editing, the whole 9 yards, and you're not really breaking it down by this. So some of the other things that tend to be output pricing are going to be things that you might be more comfortable with, like PPL is going to be on here. This is going to be pay per lead things. This is going to be things like Google Local Services, Angi Leads is going to be in this bucket. And this is the same thing. The expectation is you're paying X for that output. So the thing you're paying for is the output of that lead from Google Local Services, from Angi Lead, whatever. That's the transaction. You're not paying for the job. You're not paying for the customer. You're paying for that opportunity to talk to that human. So all these things are kind of different. Sometimes if you're paying for a product, like, so the product would be the blog, that'd be there. There's a couple of other variations on here, which are kind of distinctive. One is, do you own or rent your data in sort of this output pricing model? This, it can depend. So if you are, for instance, if you're doing pay per lead, if you're paying for a lead through a lead gen company or through Google Local Services or Angi, yeah, that's not your data. The reason that these companies are set up that way, this is true for Yelp, this is true for Angi, this is true for a lead gen company you see on Facebook, is these companies have developed their own processes, their own marketing, their own systems to become lead gens. So they might be running AdWords, they might be running Facebook ads, whatever, for themselves, for their own properties. And then they're going to turn around and sell or lease those leads back to you as long as you're paying them. As soon as you stop paying them, they're going to someone else. So in those sort of dynamics, that data is never yours. It is always the companies who are investing on creating that data, be it Angi or be it Yelp or be it Home Advisor or be it like the lead gen guy on Facebook. So you might not own your data. You might be totally renting access to another company's data if you're doing something like this. Again, this isn't necessarily bad. Just know that there's some variations of if you're paying for access to someone else's intellectual property and their own kind of work, you're not going to own that. If you are letting them have access to your property and let them do the work on your property, it's going to be a little bit different. But just know, based on the output, that's going to be a thing. The other thing, there's one more, and we're going to call it, I'm going to call it value. And this is, I'm lumping it into this because a lot of guys think about this like as a SaaS. And by SaaS, if this is a new term for you, this is going to be like software as a service. The deal with software as a service, so if you think about like a big tool like House Call Pro, Service Titan, these are software platforms that you don't pay for once, like you used to in the 90s, right? You go to like Staples or whatever, and you buy your Windows XP and you install it on your computer, and that transaction's done. A lot of these software platforms have moved to a model where you pay monthly for the service, and this could be Titan, this could be QuickBooks Online. I mean, there's thousands and thousands. It's a whole pricing metric now for software. But a lot of times when you think of value, you think of SaaS. So you're paying for access to something in this time, but you don't always have the clarity on what exactly the access is being applied to. So if you're paying access for like House Call, and by the way, I'm not trying to throw anyone House Call under the bus, you're not really saying, well, I want to spend more of my money on this part of the software and less of my money in this part of the software. Like, no, you're paying for access to the whole suite of the tools and for them to develop the tool further, for them to provide the support for you, like all that. So you're paying for the whole thing, and you don't have the like insight to go, I want to focus more of my resources on this, or I don't want to focus it on that. It's like, it's all or nothing. So on these, sometimes you own and sometimes you rent too. There are very big marketing companies who I will not name for legal reasons, but they position themselves as a marketing company, but in reality, they're a SaaS company. So you essentially rent access to their software platform. So the website, if you're doing AdWords, you are renting access to their platform for the website, and you're renting access to their AdWords. It doesn't mean that they're evil because of that. It just means that's what you're paying for the access to. So if you want something that like you own and you control, you probably want to like make sure that you find something, you know, like, hey, I'm doing this to own this at some point in time. And maybe you're having to make payments on it. Like maybe you're doing you're doing an output, you're paying for the product of the website, but maybe you don't want to pay for it all at once because websites are expensive. So maybe work on like a payment plan, something like that's totally cool. But just know a lot of the value stuff, sometimes there's questions about like who owns what, and it's only because you're paying for access to that particular platform. The F on here, and there's F is on another one here too. F has to do with efficiency. So here's the trade-off when you own something. If you are leveraging another person's data library, right? So like for let's say I'm doing the website for here that's built by a software company, and I'm paying access to their software, and I'm paying for leads from a lead gen company on Facebook. The thing that both of these companies have is this data library to get those things up and going quickly. Like essentially you onboard, you pay your money, and those things can be running real fast. What the downside though is you don't own that, right? It's fast because it already exists and they're just kind of dropping your name in the queue for whatever they need you to do. If you're trying to build something for your own business from scratch, it's just like if you're building a shop from scratch. It's just going to take time to get it ready. Now, if you have like history, if you have like good, decent digital assets already, a lot of that process is much faster. But there's still no swapping the fact that if you're trying to do it yourself, it's going to be slower. If you're trying to go faster, you're going to have to rent somebody else's data or resources or something. It doesn't mean that one is better than another. Just know that that's the trade-off you're having to make. So like for us, I can't speak for everyone else, but for us, it's like we try really hard to have our stuff where we provide full ownership of all the stuff that we provide and build. However, we also know that a lot of guys don't want to pay $30,000, $40,000 for a website that has enough content to rank on Google. Those are just expensive. So like we subsidize a lot of that work early on. So we price ourselves like this, right? We price ourselves like a SaaS, but in reality, it's like we're kind of outputting hard products that our clients own. So it's just really important to kind of understand kind of the bells and whistles because they're different. And it's also helpful because if you're trying to hold someone accountable, they can only be accountable to what they can control, right? So for instance, if you're paying someone to manage your AdWords account, so let's say your input is I'm paying somebody 3 hours to manage AdWords. Cool. You cannot hold them accountable for like ad spend because that would be on the output side, right? If you're going to do a rev share model where it's like, hey, you share the gains, cool, but you also have to share the losses. But there's not a model where it's like, hey, there's a no risk, you win and everything. Everything has a pro and con. And really just the point of this is really just to know like, hey, there's not a one right answer. There's not a one size fits all. They each have a strength. They each have a weakness. And so for everything you do, if you like the idea of having a company who like gets more efficient over time, probably a value pricing model makes sense. Because if this is done well, the longer you work with this company, the longer they work with you, the better things work. It's going to suck early on because remember, they're building it from scratch. However, over time, it's going to get better and better and better. If you are paying somebody like a rev share, like on this guy, so you're paying, let's say paid for lead ops, and the more you make, the more they make. Cool. That's totally fine. And now it's one of those like, in some cases, if you don't make the money, they don't charge you. Like they only charge you on what you make. Cool. But be careful not to be like, hey, I'm going to do a value pricing. I'm going to hire this company to do this thing, but then I'm going to hold them accountable for any losses, but I'm not going to share any wins. Like you're, from a financial standpoint, you're mixing and matching models to mitigate your risk. And that doesn't always work for the partners that you're trying to find. So they all have their strengths and weaknesses. It doesn't mean that any of them are good, bad, evil, whatever. It's just kind of understand kind of how these things work, how you're navigating it. Because just like you have your own industry and you have T&M and you have flat rate and your customers don't know any different, right? They don't know any different from a guy who's chucking a truck to a guy who's running a call and like doing pricing options. They don't know. You have no reason to know like our industry of how it's structured, on how a lot of these different things are done. So just know, like, are you paying access for a service? Are you paying for access to IP? Are you paying access to like a lead? Like what's the output or what's the input or what's the value bundle? The other one side on the value bundle, this is a sidebar. Like, so we do a lot of value bundle stuff for us because it helps our clients where if, for instance, we need to internally allocate resources, if we say, hey, we're solid on this area of the business, but we need to focus more on like this other aspect, we don't have to go back to the client and ask for more money, right? We don't have to like rebuild them because we need to spend more time over here. We didn't see this coming. We can just kind of allocate that bucket of resource as needed to make sure that we're leveraging the most we can. So yeah, all of them have pros and cons. There's not a one size fits all. Just know what they are. But I thought this would be helpful. But I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. And this maybe is the most confusing and careless video that you've ever seen. Totally okay. But I just thought it'd be helpful to kind of like pull back the curtain a bit and talk through this. But I'd like to hear your comments. As always, guys, great seeing you. Thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.